She grew up in a middle-class home. She was the daughter of a working mom, and she worked at McDonald's while she got her degree. Kamala Harris knows what it's like to be middle class. It's why she's determined to lower healthcare costs and make housing more affordable. Donald Trump has no plan to help the middle class, just more tax cuts for billionaires. Being president is about who you fight for, and she's fighting for people like you.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
That's a new ad from the Harris-Walz campaign, part of a $50 million buy that will run in battleground states on both local and national broadcasts, as well as streaming and social channels. And joining us now to talk about that and the state of the race, the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Jamie Harrison. Jamie, great to see you again this morning. Let's start with that ad. The economy is certainly a major issue in any election. This one in particular, we saw some stock market concerns earlier this week, though they have largely stabilized. But certainly inflation and the idea of middle-class Americans thinking they maybe don't have quite enough to get to where they need to go. How is the vice president going to address that?
Well, we see that inflation is coming down. The markets have stabilized this week. But when you look at the contrast between where we were 4 years ago, there is no contrast. I mean, other than we are on the upsurge, that the American economy is the envy of the entire world. Every country wishes that their economy looked like ours and had the bright future that ours had. And that's because of the policies of the Biden-Harris administration. And those are the policies that Kamala Harris will continue and build upon in order to make sure that all Americans have the availability to live the American dream, to be able to afford housing, to do good things for their kids moving forward in the future. And so I'm really, really excited about it. And I'm excited about this team. I mean, when you think about the contrast that we have right now, the split screen, it is a stark contrast. You have our MVP, that's what I call our Madam Vice President and coach, who are bringing hope and joy to this campaign. And then on the other side, you have fear and chaos coming from the wannabe dictator who had a mental meltdown yesterday, and his running mate, who is this weird old stalker guy who tells his 7-year-old to shut the hell up so he can talk to Donald Trump. That is a contrast in this election. We are focused, Democrats are focused on the future of the American people, making sure that everything is available for them to live the American dream. Donald Trump, J.D. Vance are focused on just getting power for power's sake.
Mr. Chairman, it seems to me, and I've talked to, as you know, the vice president often, and the sustaining of this momentum is probably the challenge. And I think that one of the things that has sustained it these almost 3 weeks is she has been able to elude her opponent, Donald Trump, from defining her. He likes to define people by their gender, by their race, and get into the culture wars, and the same with Walz, where she has so far run clearly, and this commercial indicates it, for American people. And at the same time, yeah, I'm proud I'm black. I'm proud I'm a woman, but this is what I can relate to with everyone. Walz, who he tried to attack on how he handled George Floyd, now we have documented evidence where he commended Walz on how he handled riots around George Floyd. And at the same time, it was Walz that responded to people like me and gave us Keith Ellison as the prosecutor there, which won the case that we didn't think the local Minneapolis DA would have done. So his ability not to pinpoint them and get them to play his game, I think, is important here. To talk about how you maintain that momentum and not be defined by your opponent.
Well, thank you for that, Rev. The first thing is to go out and campaign. Go and talk to the American people. You know, Rev, I've been doing this since I've been 16 years old in terms of these presidential campaigns. I have not seen the energy that I've seen on the ground ever, probably. You know, the only comparison would be 2008. You know, I had the fortune of opening up the rallies in both Philadelphia and Detroit these last few days. And I can tell you, people are happy. They're dancing. There's so much joy. You just say Kamala Harris's name and the crowd will erupt. You talk about Tim Walz and the crowd will erupt. And that is because Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are giving people hope. They're talking about the issues that are important to the American people. They're talking about securing and protecting the freedom of Americans to be who they want to be. As Coach Walz says, we are also basically saying to the Republican Party, maybe you need to mind your own damn business. Let's just focus on the American people. Let's not focus on all of this other outside noise that Donald Trump wants to concentrate on, because he wants to avoid having the conversation about Project 2025 and the impact that will have on the freedoms of the American people. But Kamala Harris is focused like a laser on not getting distracted and focusing on the issues.
So Susan, I'm wondering what is going to slow the momentum down for the Harris-Walz ticket. Again, you look at polls, and again, they're just snapshots of the last week, but they're all trending in her direction. And we do have, a movement that seems to be going, again, as Peggy Noonan said, a movement in search of a candidate. They found one, and as Peggy said, most importantly, they are showing up. And I've got to say, in my years of following politics and just watching as an observer, what's happened over the past couple of weeks, I mean, it reminds me of 2008 and reminds me of 1980 at the very end of the Reagan campaign, when you could really feel that groundswell picking up and the country coming together with this one person. So the question is, what does the Trump-Vance ticket need to do to slow this momentum down when these usual political attacks don't seem to be blunting any of the enthusiasm?
Yeah, I think that is a great question. Are we looking at a fundamental reset of the race here? Or are we looking at a reversion to essentially this evenly divided country? We don't know the answer to that yet. The polls certainly suggest that Kamala Harris has not only captured the enthusiasm and the momentum of her own party, but that she has sort of erased the modest leads that Trump had started to put together both nationally and in some of the battleground states. So that's back. The question is, can she actually build up a bigger lead because of the bias towards small states in the Electoral College? Democrats in recent elections have had to have not just a small lead in the national polls, but up to 4 or 5 point lead in order to go ahead and win the election. That's been true in some battleground states, too. So I'm watching to see, can she not only keep this going, but what does she come out of the Democratic convention with? To the point about keeping the momentum going, the calendar is really in her favor here. She only has 1 more week to get to the Democratic convention. It's such a compressed timetable. And I'll tell you, watching that incredible rally in Philadelphia earlier this week, it was kind of like a mini convention with that amazing stem winder of a speech by Josh Shapiro, followed by the introduction of Harris and Walz. The ticket, that suggests the Democratic convention is going to have a lot of pretty energizing speeches. So that's only a little bit more than a week away from now. Donald Trump doesn't get another chance to have a convention, this time focused on Harris. And so, they've agreed to this debate on September 10th. I don't see where and when Donald Trump is going to have the ability, looking at this calendar, to capture the attention of the American people and to get another shot at making his case in a coherent way against Harris and Walz until he gets to that debate stage. And based on his performance in that press conference yesterday, it's hard to see him offering a clear or coherent case about anything at this point.
Yeah, and Susan, I noted you earlier talking about some of the ways in which the switch from Biden to Harris has thrown in stark relief Donald Trump's incapacities and infirmities. Yesterday, when he confused Willie Brown with Jerry Brown, apparently, called to mind the time in the Republican primaries when he confused Nancy Pelosi with Nikki Haley, or Nikki Haley with Nancy Pelosi. So the signs of slippage and shrinkage in some ways on Donald Trump's part were vivid yesterday. Jamie, I wanted to ask you, though, something that Susan just raised. The debate or debates is an open question now. The only, apart from Trump's incoherence yesterday, the one piece of news he made yesterday was that he has now accepted gone back to accepting the notion that this ABC debate that was previously scheduled with him and Joe Biden, he will do that debate. apparently seems to be on for that. And Kamala Harris basically yesterday came out and said, great, glad to hear it. That's what I wanted to do. But he continues to suggest that there should also be a debate that precedes that on Fox News, and then a debate that he says is nearly negotiated completely with NBC later in September. So I'm curious about what you think about what the Harris campaign, in addition to doing what they've done already, which is say, yes, we're going to be there at the previously scheduled ABC debate, what they should do about Donald Trump's proposal of 2 additional debates. Just to point out, 3 debates is the conventional number that we see in presidential campaigns in years past. That's what's normally been done under the Commission on Presidential Debates. So you think that the Harris campaign should accept those proposals or counter-propose, or what?
Well, what we have to see, because Donald Trump is changing his mind like the weather. I mean, what we have to see is, and I think the vice president said this yesterday, let's see if he actually shows up to the debate, the ABC debate in September, because I'm not certain that he actually will. I believe that he is scared to debate our Madam Vice President because he understands how strong she is, how focused she is, and she is going to prosecute the case against him. He has never been up against somebody like Kamala Harris, and he doesn't understand and he doesn't know how to handle her, how to approach her, because she's just like dusting the shoulder off with all of the things that he's throwing at her at this point in time, because he lacks substance. He doesn't have, outside of the Project 2025, he doesn't really have an agenda for what he wants to do for the American people. He's just focused on all of these things that he's done in the past in terms of trying to disparage his opponents. But, the vice president has shown that she's a different one, and he can't approach her in that manner and hope to win this election. Momentum is on her side. We're going to go into the Democratic convention in Chicago, and the momentum is only going to build from there, because we're going to showcase the diversity and the depth of the Democratic Party and the strength of this party and how we look like America and we represent all of the greatness of America.